Bonsoir. Guten Abend Zürich. Good evening Zurich. Thank you for coming to Zurich, dear Édouard Louis. Thank you for your manifesto, both poetic and outrageous. I'm really sorry for your loss. And thank you for the privilege to have this talk with you tonight. Here in Zurich, in the richest city of the known universe, in one of the heart chambers of capitalism, in a society that pretends often to know nothing about poverty and mistake often the fight against poverty with the fight against the poor. I have so many questions and so little time. We can look at poverty in different ways, historically, politically, psychologically, culturally, but I would like to start with the social aspects. One thing that many people reject is the idea you mentioned in your text, the idea of social determinism. Can you explain to us what it means and why it has such a bad reputation?
Thank you, Lukas. Yes, I mean, social determinism is the way that the structure around us, all kinds of structures of class, of gender, of sexuality, of race, how they determine our life and how they frame our lives and how they push us to make certain decisions, to have certain tastes, to have certain things we like or certain things we don't like. And in my life, I have seen people being so hit by those social determinism. And what, like related to what you were saying before, what shocked me the most when I started to write and when I started to talk about social determinism and when I started to write about it was the way that the bourgeoisie was turning not the social determinism as a violent thing, but the fact to talk about social determinism as violence, and not the social determinism as such, you know. And for example, I will take a very concrete example. When I published Who Killed My Father, which is a book I wrote about my father and his life and how much his life was shaped by social violence. When I published this book in America, in the US, most of American critics attacked me quite violently, which I always love. It feels good. And the things that most of the times they were saying was, Édouard Louis is a violent person because he said that his father's life was framed by social determinism, and then Édouard Louis denies the liberty of his father. So what a strange flipping of the script to say that what is violent is not social determinism, but the fact that you talk about social determinism. And what does it mean to reject the idea of social determinism? What it means, if you say that people are free of what they do, of their acts, of their lives, of their decision, then if they are free of everything, it means that they are responsible of everything, you know. And that's why I was mentioning America, because it's a very big ideology in America, the ideology of freedom. And there is this idea that people are not framed by social determinism, and therefore they are free, and they are free to do what they want. But what does it mean? It means that if my father stopped school at 16 years old, it's his fault because he didn't work harder enough? Does it mean that my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather and my great-grandfathers were all of them factory workers because they didn't work enough or they didn't use their liberty in the proper way? Does it mean that all the poor people that I was living with or that I knew in my family were poor because of their lack of using the liberty? So for me, in fact, the notion of social determinism is much more powerful in terms of emancipation than the concept of liberty. I think we should, strangely, for me, the concept of liberty is conservative, but the fight and the longing for liberty is a matter of progress, you know, as if there was nothing more opposed than the ideology of liberty and the fight for liberty. Liberty should be something that you always fight for, you know. A little bit like Jacques Derrida was saying about democracy. There is this very beautiful idea from Derrida about democracy, when Derrida was saying that democracy should be something that is never ending, you know. Democracy should be a re-questioning all the time of what we should create, what we should transform, what we should do better. And if you say, okay, now we are in perfect democracy, it is profoundly anti-democratic, because democracy is the movement, according to Derrida. And in fact, I think that liberty is the same. Liberty is a movement. And if you state that someone is free, if you state that liberty is a human condition, then you are doing something conservative. Like when you say that democracy is a condition. It should be only a fight.
We cannot be free, but we can free ourselves. But let me be the advocatus diaboli for a moment, because one thing that many people are blamed, like when they change classes, like you, is a lack of credibility. Look at you. You made it. You came out of the misery. You achieved so many things. You are an example for the success of meritocracy. And if only your poor brother would have taken an example of you and not the other way around, you, your brother, as an example, he wouldn't have ended in this way. What do you respond to these people?
That they are wrong. And that in fact, the things I've been trying to write about and to explain also in the books is the fact that I escaped my social fate and the poverty of my childhood, not because I was more free than the others, but because I was less free than the others. I was more, like talking about social determinism, I was more socially determined by the others. And that's why I was able to escape. Because as Didier Ribon says in Returning to Reims, because he had more or less the same trajectory, I had two big identities or aspects of my life, which was a social verdict, poor, and a sexual verdict, gay, faggot. And those two determinisms were clashing against each other. They were entering in a kind of conflict against each other. And they didn't let me any choice but to escape. But what I've been saying in Changer Méthode or in En finir avec Eddie Bellegueule is that I didn't want to escape. You know, the second part of Das Ende von Eddy, which is more than 50% of the book, it's called a failure, because it was a failure for me to escape. My dream in my childhood was to be conformed, was to be normal, was to be accepted. And the others were telling me, you are not normal, you are not normal, you are a faggot, you are not masculine, you don't know how to act like a real boy. And my dream was not to be an artist. My dream was to stop making my father ashamed, you know. When my father or brother were talking about me, they were so full of shame, you know. I remember walking down the village with my brother, and my brother was telling me, beware of the way you walk, because everyone say you're a faggot, and then they will make fun of me because of that. Put your hands in your pocket, because he said that my hands were like moving too much. He was so ashamed of that. And my dream was that this shame would stop, not to become Simone de Beauvoir, you know. I didn't know who she were at the time. And then because of that, I was less free than the others. And then my escape was a failure, because I failed to be accepted, to be normal, and then my failure saved me. But so it's not a story. I think that what we put very often in the mainstream, which is the kind of opposition between freedom and social determinism, is a very cheap opposition. And what is much more interesting is to understand configurations, how much your class and your sexuality and your gender or your friendships, for example, or how all those aspects of your life can clash and suddenly create emancipation. But it's not like, it's not as simple as, you know, someone who suddenly wake up one morning and decides to break free. It is an illusion. And therefore, if you say that the little boy that I was, or that any other person who had the same trajectory, if that person was not determined to escape, but had no choice but to escape, it means we have room for action. Politically speaking, it's much more interesting. If you say, Eddy, the kid that I was not born free, but became free. It means that liberty is a process. It means like when Simone de Beauvoir say, we are not born women, we become a woman. We could say, you are not born free, you become free. And what does it mean, this becoming process? It means that there is room for action. It's not some people who are just born more sensitive or everything. All of this is a lie and an ideology, a violent ideology, as if I was more free than my mother or my sister, or I was more courageous. I was less. I wasn't different.
Failure or not, you attended 2 elite universities in Paris, École Normale Sup et l'EHESS. And we all know about the segregated French society. How did you succeed, and how did what was needed in form of subordination to the rules of the reigning rules of this society of you?
It was complicated. First, because the dominant class, they always create fiction about their world. And when you are confronted to their world, you realize that it's a lie. So basically, when I went to École des Hautes Études or École Normale, I thought everyone would be so clever and bright and would be willing to talk about literature, and that I would see Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir in the corridor. But in fact, at the end, I realized that so many people were here for class reason, much more than for sensitivity reason. They were here because they were prepared to be here. We know that sociologically, the kind of people who access those schools comes from the same milieu, mostly white people from the center of Paris who attend certain high school. That's why they were there most of the time. They were not shaking for the passion of literature.
It wasn't brain that brought me here.
Exactly, and I mean it's also a mission of, maybe one day we'll write about that, because it's also a mission of art to demystify and to undo the lies of the dominant class about themselves. And I think that's why Marcel Proust or Thomas Bernhard are so great, because when you read La Recherche or when you read Des arbres à abattre from Thomas Bernhard, you see that this milieu who have the power and intimidate other people with the power are in fact much more grotesque than what you would imagine. The characters in Proust are completely grotesque. They are stupid and everything. But when a cleaning woman sees them, she's intimidated by them. So they create the intimidation through a lie and a fiction of what they are. That's what my first impression at school. And I think that, yes, undoing the mythologies, the fictions and the lie of the dominant class should also be a role of literature. There is also a young, incredible photographer called Ralph Ellison. You could check his work on Instagram. He makes pictures of very rich people, and he's trying to show the kind of fictions that is the condition for the way they present themselves to society. So, yes, that was my
You had
feeling.
to disguise yourself?
No, I ran away. So basically what I did was to take my classes in a very cynical way, to try to keep on my curriculum vitae that I went to the school in case I would need to find a job. But I would not go there. I would just go take the class and escape immediately. And what saved me at the time was friendship, because when I arrived in Paris, I became friend with Didier Ribon, who is my closest friend. And suddenly Didier started to introduce me to writers, philosophers, artists, and friendship was a kind of counter power against the school institution, the scholar system, and in a way, it's what continued afterwards. For me now, friendship. Geoffroy de Laganerie wrote a beautiful book about it called Three. It was published in German, also by Fischer Verlag, and how much for us friendship is a place of escape, to escape institutions, social violence. You know what it is when you write when you write about violence and you are suddenly attacked. For example, what it means to have a group of friends that push you to continue trying to be radical, to continue what you do. Friendship was always working like this at the time. And
your chosen family, die Wahlverwandtschaften.
Yeah, or not family precisely, because family is so awful. I mean, yeah, but friendship is much better, and the chosen non-family, it would be as a chosen please no family, and yes, and how much I'm kind of fascinated by those writers who live like in isolated places. We know some of them, like Philip Roth or Thomas Bernhard, who was living in his farm near Salzburg. And for me, it would be impossible, because when I write, I need friendship, not as an anecdote. The question is not like, who is Édouard Louis having dinner with? We don't care. But what it is like a kind of laboratory for creation, for radicality. When you create and suddenly all the mainstream papers say it's not good, it's exaggerated, it's not like that, it's too violent, it's too sociological, it's too emotional, it's too blah blah. Then if you have Didier Ribon or Geoffroy de Laganerie telling you you should continue, you don't care, and it's a counterpower. And already at the time of school, friendship was this kind of space of resistance.
Let's turn to politics, please. Very short question. I don't know if the answer can be that short as well. Why did the left fail to organize the poors?
I hope you are not tired and you are available until tomorrow morning. I mean, probably Didier Ribon explained it much more than me in Rucker-Nachens. I experienced in my family really what Didier wrote in his book. I was experiencing it live in my childhood. My father, my mother, everyone around me were telling and repeating every day that the left didn't care about them anymore, that they abandoned them. They felt completely left behind. We know that, and once again, Didier describes it much better than me, but we know that there was like a very big neoliberal turn in the 80s and 90s, not only in Europe, but all around the world, with Reagan and with Thatcher and with the SPD turning more and more right-wing in Germany, and the Socialist Party and the Labour in England creating, the Golden Man, the city and everything. There was like a big move on the right, and we stopped talking about poverty, we stopped talking about exclusion, we stopped talking about misery, and then the far right took that chance to say we are going to talk about the poor, and for the poor it became the place where they strangely felt recognized, and also suddenly, of course, it's not the only reason. It clashes with many things. It clashes with white supremacy and the fact that the world is changing and some people are moving from countries to the others, and white people don't cope with that. They cannot accept that, I remember my father telling on my childhood, there are black people and Arabs everywhere, and he had never seen in one black or Arab person in his life, and he has this feeling that something was changing in his world. And I think that, of course, this, with the changing of the world, this white supremacy has become stronger and more terrifying. And maybe last point that I try to talk about recently, and it's a lot also about poverty, is we know that poverty is bigger and bigger. I mean, you have many sociologists who show it, many political analysts who show it, that the rich are richer and richer. There was an analysis that was published a few days in France in Libération, showing that the richest people multiplied by, I think, 40 the money that they had in 30 years, like something crazy. While the poor are more and more precarious, more and more poor. They do 0-hour contract, you know, with Amazon, with Uber, with everything. They don't have security. They have less and less welfare. We know that Macron has been cutting the welfare for people to pay for their rent and everything, for the poorest. And at the same time, he cut the taxes for the richest, almost on the same week, which was, okay, less money for the poor and more money for the rich. That was his politics. And we know that because of that, the gap between the rich and the poor is bigger and bigger. And I think that because of that, you have some poor people who try to grab harder the last things that they have in their life. And one of the last things that they have in their life is masculinity. And I think that it plays a big role today in the far right, and we know that all the far right rising all around the world with Trump, with J.D. Vance, with Millet, they play a lot with the idea of masculinity, you know, and masculinity is, as I tried to articulate recently, is a kind of richness of the poor, is what you have when you have nothing. You know, Pierre Bourdieu was already saying this, that when you take everything from people, when you take money from them, when you take access to culture from them, when you take access to traveling, to housing, to everything, the only thing that they have left is their bodies. And therefore, it's not a surprise if they build an idea of the body, of the strength, of the masculinity, because it's everything they have. And so the more the world go poor, and the more people try to hold on to masculinity, because it's everything they have in the end. And that's what struck me, you know, in America, when you see the last election. In America, they have some left-wing candidates, you know. You have some ecologist, green candidates, you have some communist candidates, you have some people who want to make life better for the poor. But if you go see the poor and you tell them, okay, I give you a better life, a better education, education for your kids, education for your family, I give you hospital, I give you money, or I assault trans people because they transgressed the rule of masculinity and femininity, what do you prefer? And people prefer to assault a trans than to have a better life. But there is a social explanation to that. It's because people hold on to masculinity because of the impression that it's the last thing that they have. And I think that there is a deep link between the class system, class exclusion, class domination, and the rise of a certain ideology of masculinity. And to end with that, because as you say, it needs a long answer, when I say that like masculinity is the richness of the poor, I don't mean that it's only the richness of the poor for economical poverty. I think that it's also the case for intellectual poverty. That's why you have so many people in the bourgeoisie who are so attached to masculinity, because intellectually they are so poor. Because when you see Vance or Trump or Millet, they are so stupid. I mean, no, we know, right? It's not. No, it's true. It's not surprise. I mean, everyone is like, how can they be so stupid? There is this strange concept from Martin Heidegger when he talked about
German philosopher.
The German philosopher who was like a not good person.
Very German.
Far from that, who was very excited by Nazism. But he was also a philosopher, and sometimes he was different in his philosophy. And he created a concept of, I don't know how to say it in English, but to be pauvre en monde. So it's a kind of poverty, not an economical
Arm an
poverty.
Welt.
Can you say it again? It's beautiful.
Arm an Welt.
Voilà. It's pauvre en monde, and in fact, he would strangely say that against animals. He would say that animals have a poor world because they have a poor connection to the world. They don't understand the world. He would say that animals don't act, they react. And Derrida discussed it for people who are interested by it in his books about animals called The Animal, Therefore I Am. But if we detach that from the context in which Heidegger was using it, I think it's very interesting to understand that some people are pauvre monde, and that Millet or Trump are extremely pauvre monde, and that's why they are also so attached to masculinity, because it's a very easy richness, it's a very cheap richness.
In a world with complete and total competition, people embrace the things they cannot lose, and masculinity is certainly one of the things. Nationalism belongs to it too. In fact, it's a strange thing that although authoritarians differ a lot, they have one thing in common: Putin, the Pope, with your brother. In fact, it's homophobia. In another manifesto, another one than the one you read tonight, in a manifesto you published 10 years ago, together with the sociologist Geoffroy de Laganerie, a manifesto for intellectual and political counter-offensive. You defined 3 principles. The first one was the principle of refusal, that one should refuse certain discourses, that you should not talk about certain topics. The second one was the principle of designation, that you have to name a lie. And the third one has become a buzzword in a complete different circumstances. It's the principle of redistribution de shame. La honte doit changer le camp, Gisèle Pellicot nous a appris. Which one of these principles would you still accept 10 years later?
All of them, even if they didn't work really well when we see the political situation. Maybe not enough people read our manifesto with Geoffroy. Yes, there was like this principle of refusal, of refusing to accept some debate and some discussion, which is also, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with him tonight, but which is also an idea from Derrida, when he was saying that freedom is also the shutting down some questions. Democracy is not only about opening things, but also about clothing things. It's also about creating silence, you know. There are some moments where some questions are not acceptable, you know. You cannot say, are gay people normal, or, you know, are Jewish people too rich, or like all the discourses from the Nazi times. So the democracy is about shutting down also, creating silence and creating shame. And I'm very interested by shame because in my literary world of people who write about class and everything, we talk very often about the negative aspect of shame, you know. What is the shame you feel when you change your milieu? What is the shame when you change your class and you are not adapted and you have to completely transform yourself and everything? But I'm also interested in the very beautiful political aspect of shame. What it is to create shame and spread shame on the world, which means that some people will not be able to say what they say, you know. And we've seen it. I'm talking about the political situation again, but we saw that suddenly with Trump winning the election, so many people came out of the closet, like Mark Zuckerberg, the guy of Facebook and everything, and they said, yes, finally we can say what we have to say. So we have to fight for masculinity and enough left-wing bullshit and enough blah, blah, blah. And so probably this guy was thinking the same way before. But the left was more powerful before, like 10 years ago. It was before this explosion of far right. And the left was creating some shame on these people. And we don't care if people agree with us or not. You know, I don't care if I convince them as long as they shut up. You know, I know I will never convince them. I will never change them. But if I make them shut up, you know, it's such a beautiful way of fighting. You know, it reminds me, the question was addressed a lot within the gay movement in the last couple of years, because you started to have like big corporate capitalist companies like Air France or like Amazon and suddenly they were talking about gay issues and issues of homophobia, and they were inclusive, and they would put rainbow flag on their facade and everything. And some people were saying, oh, but they are using us and they are using our fights and it's pinkwashing. And in fact, I disagree. It was such a good thing. It was a victory from the LGBT movement because we managed to create a situation in which it would have been shameful not to talk about homophobia, not to talk about gay people, not including gay people. So there is no such thing as pinkwashing. I think it's a stupid concept. It's a refusal to look at the victory of the left that we sometimes achieve through building a wall of shame, a situation in which it's no longer impossible to talk about us. And we don't care that if those people, when they go to bed, in the end, they think, oh my God, I hate faggots. I don't care if people think that. As long as what they do is helping people in their everyday life. So, voila, I think that shame today...
But you have also to admit that the opposite behavior was more successful. Trump lied all the time. Everybody knew that he was lying. And although he was elected. And he was elected not only by liars, but by the majority of the American society. And I brought you something that disturbed me very much. It was one of the charts that proves this fact. It's the groups that shifted toward Republicans. And it's the same thing among race and education, or age. In fact, non-white, no-degree people, non-white, no-degree, they are in a systemic danger to be poor, and they shifted with 37% toward Donald Trump since Barack Obama. And it's the same thing with non-white with a bachelor. They shifted largely, hugely, 21% to Trump. So race, education, and class, they don't seem to be sufficient to explain this sad fact.
Merci. Let me look at the tragedy.
No, it's just when you are citing these charts, people always ask, "Where's the proof?" So
no, but yeah, I mean, it shows also that we have been seeing it in France with many gay people shifting to the far right, for example.
Absolutely.
Particularly for gay people, for me as a gay person, it's quite shocking to see some gay people turning to the far right. I mean, even if it's always existed, but there is something extremely strange, and which means that the reason why someone would go vote and make a decision are probably more complicated than what we tend to say every day in the public speech, and it comes from deeper structures than the surface of only identity. It's probably more complex than that. And what is very difficult, I saw a speech by Judith Butler recently, in which she said something very interesting about that, is that about what you were mentioning before, the lies that Trump have been saying, like we know that...
And all the racist slurs.
The racist slurs, the racist lies also, like exaggerating every number that he quotes and everything. And Butler was saying that we are in a very difficult moment because truth is not a weapon anymore that you can fight those people with, because the problem with those people, and it's probably linked to structural history and to a long process, is that they are happy to be wrong. And Butler said we should not underestimate the joy. It's almost psychoanalytical. It's an inner joy of being wrong. And it goes with the devaluation of truth in our societies, and I can relate to that so much because, you know, I remembered when I was in high school and I started to become different from my family, and I was fighting in the radical left and doing demonstration in the big city, in the region where we were living. And when I would go back home, I would come back in my family with my new speeches, you know, against homophobia, feminist speeches, anti-racist speeches. And I was quoting numbers and things that I was learning from my new life. And I could see that my father, that I was always having argument with, he was happy to be wrong. He was taking pleasure in it. What it is when you have been, and it's also structural, because what it is when you have been so excluded from, I mean, in the context of the working class at least, excluded from the cultural system, from the knowledge, from the access to everything, all the places that are defined like the place of truth. What do you do in order to resist? You build a counter system in which wrongness is the value, you know? That's strangely how, you know, that's strangely how forms of capital works, you know. The thing is, like, it's linked to what you were saying before in the very beginning of the conversation about why do some people escape, why don't they escape, and why don't they... One thing that people usually don't understand is that according to the milieu in which you live, the things that give you values are extremely different, you know. And in the milieu of my childhood, for example, masculinity was a big value. Violence, being tough with the others, was something that was recognized and encouraged by the others. And so when people tell me, maybe your brother didn't make it or didn't escape because he didn't make enough efforts, in fact, he made efforts, so much. But it's just that in his world, what was a positive capital, what was a valuable capital, was masculinity. So it's not that he's not fighting, he is fighting. But the values are not the same. And that people don't understand. They think that everybody lives with the same world of values, or everybody recognizes the same values. And today it's what is happening with lies and wrongness. Lies and wrongness have become forms of positive capital in certain places in the world.
Yeah, and vulgarity is always heard. Yes, we all hate it, but we all listen to it. Since we are two writers, let's talk for a while about literature, no? About the genre of autofiction, which had a great success recently. The most famous example is Anleitung with the Nobel Prize. What are the reasons for this success? And what is autofiction anyway?
I don't know, I never understood. Because, you know, strangely, it became such a big category worldwide. Like 4, 5, 6 years ago, it started to be everywhere. But in France, it was an old thing. You know, it's really, like in France, it's a movement from the 80s, 90s. And so it was bizarre because the moment it was declining in France, it was suddenly used all around the world. And I thought it was a thing from the past, and suddenly it was the discussion that was going on everywhere. And for me, precisely, there was some things that I didn't like in the world autofiction, which was to save the notion of fiction within the autobiographical work, you know? To say that when you do autobiography, when you write about life, about experience, which is an old tradition, from Montaigne to Rousseau to Simone de Beauvoir, it's extremely old. So it's
Confessions.
not new. The Confession, it's one of the...
Very, I rely to Christianity.
Yeah, and Saint Augustine, it relies, of course, to Christianity to have something to confess, like as if
we are all sinners.
We are all sinners, and we need to confess it. But in fact, I mean, if you don't think in terms of religion, in a bad world, we are all sinners, like sinners without God, but sinners because we all participate in the world we live in, and this world is bad. Whether or not we want it, we are part of it. And so we are by definition.
If there's a hell below, we are all going to go.
Yeah, I think
Curtis
so.
Mayfield said yes.
Let's cross our fingers. But the thing is, there is this, there is this idea that when you write autobiography, it's always fiction, and I mean that the idea of autofiction was comforting people in this idea, and for me it was a way of making autobiography less dangerous, because I realized when I started to write about my past or my family and the poverty and the violence and everything I've been talking about tonight, I remember being in this kind of context and so many people coming to see me at the end of the encounter and telling me, but there is a little bit of fiction in what you say, right? As if it would have helped them feel better with what I was saying.
It's only a story.
Yeah, it's only a story. And anyway, there is no such thing as objectivity because there are multiple ways of interpreting something. And for me, sometimes the way that this is being used as a tool to make literature less radical, and that's why even if he was not doing autobiography, Émile Zola, when he was writing, was talking about scientific literature, and he elaborated the concept of scientific literature because he wanted to say, I talk about objective things, objective aspects, and then you cannot just turn your head and say, oh, but it's his point of view, and points of view are, we can discuss them. I think that in our lives, there are some areas of objectivity that are undisputable,
Yeah, but Zola was obliged to use literature because the discipline of sociology doesn't exist. So Germinal would be sociological work today.
Absolutely.
But in what extent do you feel obliged to the truth?
I mean,
You're writing about your brother.
First, of course, it's a decision we can make to write about the truth or to write about other things. I mean, I'm a great reader of fiction, and probably fiction was in a way more influential to me in my life than autobiographical work. Toni Morrison or William Faulkner or even Émile Zola are writers of fictions or Proust, and they are the people that I am obsessed with the most.
We all love the same writers, isn't it funny?
They are just the best. It happens, It's like Michael Jackson or Madonna. Sometimes you are just the best, and Toni Morrison was the best, and of course she obsesses all of us. It's just justice. Sometimes justice happens, and the thing is, so I'm not saying we should all write about truth or about our lives, but why do we have to justify ourselves when we do it? Why do we have to say sorry? Why do we have to say, but it's autofiction, but there is a little bit of part of fiction, or as soon as you write, there is a part of fiction? I really don't believe in it, and I believe also that I felt obliged because I survived something. And we know that autobiography in history has always been the genre of survivors. It's people who survive from wars, from concentration camps. It's women, it's gay people, it's migrants, it's people who survived slavery who wrote autobiography. There is often a deep connection between surviving and testifying. Because when you survive, sometime to tell the story is a way of regaining some power over what you have been living. And the examples that I often take is very interesting for me is the example of Salman Rushdie, because Salman Rushdie, all his life, he has been writing fiction, great books of fiction, big books, long books, where he tries different ways of writing with different characters talking and different way of narrating the story and different techniques that he invented. And 2 times in his life, he wrote autobiography. which was the day that he had a fatwa against him, and the day was attacked by a terrorist on stage in a literary event like that. And in those two moments, he didn't have a choice but to write autobiography, as if his body didn't give him a choice. And it's the two autobiographies that he wrote after experiencing a very huge violence. And yes, if you think of autobiography, you think of, and that's why also most of the literature from the, which is the extreme form of violence, most of the literature from the concentration camps were autobiographical. Primo Levi, Charlotte Delbo.
That's the position of a witness, which is very important also in law. Absolutely. But you can raise, a little doubt in it, because people are not only witnesses. Your brother wasn't not only a witness or an example. He wanted to have a personal life. So in a way, you put yourself in a position to interpret, to give value to his own life. How do you justify that? What makes you so special?
I mean that for me, understanding always have been a way of surviving. So when I'm confronted to a situation of violence, it became something almost automatic, you know. If I want to survive, I have to understand. Every time there is something violent happening, I need to spend time on it. And once again, it's not compulsory. You have ways of, and I find there is, you know, this very beautiful Japanese movie called Shokuzai, which talks about 5 little girls who experience a sexual assault and the murder of one of their friends. One day they are at school, there is like a crazy guy who come, he take one of the girl, he raped her and killed her. And then the movie, in several episodes, follows the reaction of those girls. And what is very beautiful is that you see that 2 of the girls, they absolutely want to remember and to testify. And 2 of the girls absolutely want to forget about it. And I think it's extremely important to preserve those 2 possibilities in the way we deal with storytelling, with past, with trauma. You know, that's the problems that happen in court, in justice, when someone is assaulted. Some people want to talk about it, and some people want to forget it. And the problem with the justice system is that it forces you to do the same for everyone. You have to just testify, you have to talk about it, you have to try to understand, you have to explain it, you have to prove it, because the justice system never believes you. And what would it be to create a world of multiple choices where you can react extremely differently? And I remember, like, one of the biggest privileges I had in my life was to get to know Toni Morrison, to meet her, to have lunch with her, and she was telling me, I will never write about my life. I don't want that, because I suffered enough, so I write about the subjects that crossed my life, but I want to take it somewhere else, to put it outside of my body. And I found it beautiful that literature, contrary to the justice systems that impose the same path to everyone, that literature is giving this possibility. One of the best person who wrote about it was, once again, Charlotte Delbo in her trilogy about Auschwitz, which is one of the most beautiful trilogy in literature ever written. The last volume of the trilogy is about what it is to want to forget, or what it is to want to understand. And the thing is, as you were saying, I also try to understand on behalf of the others. And I don't ask them if they agree or not. It's an ethical question, but it's beyond my control. I have to do it. Sometimes, you know, I know that when I write a story, I will hurt some people, that they don't want me to do it, but I can't help. It's not my choice.
Time is running incredibly. Yeah. I forgot the time. Maybe there is no right to talk. Maybe we just have to take it. I wanted to finish with something that that is very important to me. And you mentioned the name quite often tonight, Pierre Bourdieu. And for everybody who knows nothing about Pierre Bourdieu, you have heard about the habitus. In fact, it's the thing that are learned without being taught, the things we drink with our mother milk, or like the saying goes, you can take the boy out of the ghetto, but not the ghetto out of the boy. Tell me something about that. Where is the ghetto in the boy, and where is the boy in the ghetto?
Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult question. Habitus stays with you. Habitus, I mean, Bourdieu sounds complicated, but it's in a way it's simple. Your habitus, it's all the stories that you have incorporated in your body. The story of your class, the story of your culture, the story of your country, the story of your parent. All of that is your background that suddenly become your flesh and give orientation to the choices you will make, to the taste you will have. Bourdieu was obsessed with taste. And what Bourdieu says is that when you escape your milieu, as you were saying, your milieu stays in you, which can be, a difficult or sad and melancholic thing, but it can be also a beautiful thing in a way. I think that Pierre Bourdieu wrote sociology in a different way than other sociologists because he didn't come from the same world than them. I think that the absence of privilege can sometimes be such a privilege. There is this idea of Gilles Deleuze about Kafka that say that Kafka completely reinvented the language because of his lack of privilege, because the Jewish community in Prague where Kafka was living had a German with a much, how can we say that, with a much poor, once again it's a question of poverty, with a much poor vocabulary than the German that was being used in other cities. And Deleuze analyzes the fact that Kafka had such a limited number of words compared to other writers. But because of that, Kafka had to completely distort the language and change the language in order to communicate things. And Deleuze says that this lack, this absence of privilege from Kafka, as opposed to the great writers who were born in privileges, milieu, in the bourgeoisie of Sachs or blah, blah, or I don't know where, he turned this lack of privilege into a way of completely reinventing literature. And in a way, I think that today, the habitus of people who come from the working class or write about the working class, like you do, like Annie Ernaux is doing, like Christian Baron is doing, like Didier Eribon is doing, is they come from a world with a different habitus and they crash in this privileged milieu of literature and they come with different values. And it forces us to change the definition of literature, maybe to do something more radical, maybe to do something more aggressive, maybe to do something more angry. Anger was a big part of my childhood. We were so angry. We were screaming in front of the TV. We were, screaming at each other. And then I, related to what you have been saying in the beginning, when I arrived in Paris in the bourgeoisie, it was really misplaced to be angry. You had to be polite and not to scream and to express your political emotions very quietly, and you couldn't. And then what it is to import within literature some values that are deeply outside of the literary system, how much it makes you change the way of writing literature. That's what Annie Ernaux did, with her very direct, straightforward. She says in one of her books, I wanted to write my books the same way I was writing letters to my parents when I was a working class girl. And in doing that, she completely broke free with the certain ideology of literature, you know, of the big metaphor and the big book with the beautiful images, which can be beautiful. That's why we are obsessed with Proust. So she doesn't say it's bad, and she loves Proust. She talks a lot about him. But she says, what if I do something from outside and make literature explode because of that? And I think that to not have the right habitus in the right place is also such a privilege. And I'm so sad for people who came to the world with a privileged habitus. I'm so happy to have my little habitus inside me.
Wonderful. You were very generous, Édouard Louis. Thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edouard Louis, for this poetic manifesto. Lukas, Edouard, for this so rich discussion. Thank you for listening, being so attentive. And I would like to invite you to do three things. Stay here longer with us. There is an apéro waiting for us next door. And I would like to thank the Ambassade de France en Suisse for supporting this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. Second thing, go see the book table in the foyer, which is organized by the bookstore Mille et Deux Feuilles. And I'm sure that Edouard Louis is going to be signing the books also for you. He's going to be around for a little while longer this evening. And third and last thing, come back tomorrow. We will have Lukas Bärfuss again on stage with Katja Centinetta, Caterina Latifi. You will be talking about a big subject, Erben, heritage. And we have Kim Thuy also in the public this evening. We have Stefan Boskovic. We have Jean d'Amérique in the Cabaret Voltaire for a late night. And we start at 11 in the morning with the subject of depths in literature by Anglistik Professorin Barbara Straumann. So grab a glass of wine, come back tomorrow. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.